Thank you guys for coming, especially for the last session of the day. I didn't realize this was the last session, but I guess we're all going to the keynote after this. So I'm Alicia SANCHEZ, and I'm going to talk to you guys about casual gaming in the Department of Defense. So have any of you guys worked with the DoD before? Yeah. One or two, yeah? And we apologize up front for that experience. No, I'm teasing. And how was your experience? Yeah, good. Excellent. Well, the reason I came here today and the reason we wanted to talk here is because we think that there's a lot of opportunity in the Department of Defense, and we think that it's a market that a lot of the Casual Gaming Association hasn't really started to break into yet. So I'm going to give you guys some examples in the microcosm of my experiences with casual games in the DoD, and then we'll look at some other opportunities. So why the Department of Defense? Primarily because we have a lot of money. Right? I mean, we spent $100 million last year on, games. And I know that doesn't seem like a lot compared to the huge games industry, but it's not bad. And while a lot of the types of games that we think of for the Department of Defense are sort of those really heavy military, tactical, Call of Duty types of games, there certainly is a drive now to do a lot more of the education and the smaller training objectives using different types of games. And a lot more often than not now, that's starting to include casual games. So why would we want to use casual games? So I'm going to give you guys just a teeny little bit of psychology here, because that's kind of what I do. And as most of you probably know, the military does a lot of training. And there's formal training, which is in a classroom, and then there's a lot of opportunity for informal learning. And we consider informal learning to be the things that you do when you're not in a classroom, when you're maybe sitting at your desk and you have a few minutes to kill, and we have an opportunity to put our content in front of you. And so from the perspective of casual games, we really focus on informal learning opportunities, or learning opportunities that we hope people will have during their spare time. So by doing this informal learning perspective, what we've realized is we can give people a lot of different types of opportunities using these smaller, lower risk types of games. And it allows us to really focus on motivation and to do some things that are a little bit entertaining. And given where I work, that's going to become particularly important, because I work for a place called Defense Acquisition University. And how many of you guys have ever heard of that? You notwithstanding. Yes. Anything that the US military can't create itself, we have to buy. And that means things from pencils to boots to planets to planes. Anything that we don't create ourselves, we have to buy. And before we can buy anything, we have to go through this really long, very structured acquisition procedure. And so Defense Acquisition University is the DoD's corporate university for training the acquisition technology and logistics workforce, which is not the most exciting stuff. However, it does give us a lot of opportunity within education to do some really interesting things with games. I started at DAU, which is DAU. It's kind of funny, right? Because it's not like the same DAU that you guys talk about, I know. I started DAU about 5 years ago, and we started 3 different sorts of games initiatives. And so I'm just going to really quickly explain all of them to you before we get into the casual games one, because they all sort of relate to each other. The first one is games in curriculum. And this is usually the types of games that are going to be very highly custom, and they're going to be used in our formal courseware. And so these are much longer games. A lot of them are 3D, much more elaborate types of experiences that relate to our centered focus areas, which are accounting, systems engineering, contracting. I mean, really not the great stuff, right? The next initiative is the furthest one down, is our continuous learning. In order for people to keep their jobs with the acquisition technology and logistics workforce, they have to complete a certain amount of our courses every year. And it's like holding people hostage in its own way. And so we started imparting games in those because we realized that a lot of what we were presenting was really heavily policy driven. And so it was a lot of, very kind of handbook type stuff, and we weren't giving people the opportunity to actually use any of the information that we were presenting to them. And then the third one, which is going to be our focus, are the casual games initiatives. And those are games that focus on the core aspects of acquisition. So games that we expect every single person in our university and everyone in the AT&L workforce to be able to play successfully, because they center around the very core concepts of our educational content. So we launched a casual game site, and this was an interesting thing for us because we hadn't done it before. But after taking a really good look at who our students were, we realized that we were pretty highly aligned with what the Casual Games Association called their target demographic. We have a split between men and women. They're not the youngest, they're not the oldest. We're kind of middle of the road, just like everyone else. So we launched the first ever casual games site in the Department of Defense. We also launched the first ever serious games site. And you guys are familiar with serious games, right? Games for education, games for any purpose other than entertainment. And that was a really interesting thing for the Department of Defense to do. It was our first foray really into the casual game space, and the response was actually pretty good. We built a site that I'm sure is based on a lot of the entertainment types of casual game site that you guys are very familiar with. And we did that because we wanted to provide the same sorts of experiences for our students that we thought that they were having in their outside worlds, right? In their actual entertainment-based or enjoyment-based experiences. We wanted to provide a similar quality of experience. So therefore, our users can go to our site, which is a secure site, which is interesting for those of you who are familiar with the Department of Defense. There's certainly a lot of IT hoops to jump through, to say the least, but we're on a secure site, which means anyone who is behind any government firewall can access our site, which means we are really the only opportunity that government employees have to play games during the day, which is kind of a big deal for us. So users can come, they can create a profile, they can play the games. They don't have to log in, but they can. Once they've logged in, they can rate the games, they can store their favorites, they can collect badges for their play, they can use leaderboard functionality in some of the games that leverage that, and they can browse by categories, they can challenge other people to little games. We've tried to include a lot of the functionality. So I wanted to tell you guys a little bit about the types of games, because I think that that's sort of the more important thing, that we get an understanding of what types of experiences we're having within the Defense Acquisition University and the DoD sorts of games that relate to education. And then I want to tell you guys about a contest that the DoD hosts annually that it would be great to have more submissions to, certainly. So the types of stuff that we teach, as I said, not the most exciting content. Procurement fraud. How many of you guys have ever heard of procurement fraud? Yeah. So procurement fraud is when you work for the government and you start dealing with a contractor, let's say to buy something really big like, an F-35. And perhaps they promise you things like money or a car or a job when you retire from the government. That is procurement fraud. It's a very interesting topic that's very shades of gray. And it was one of the first games that we built at DAU from the casual games perspective because we wanted people to have experiences, just kind of something a little bit interesting, because there's a little bit of intrigue involved in it, that they could relate to. And so we had ZG Games out of Orlando, Florida, build us our first game, and it is essentially a procurement fraud specialist who walks through investigation. So the first section of it is going through an office or a garage or a warehouse and finding little clues, and you collect the clues. And then you move into an interrogation phase. And you not only have to identify what type of procurement fraud that you think might have happened, but also you have to determine if fraud was committed, and if so, how you're going to handle that fraud. So it was an opportunity for people to actually apply what for us has been a very traditional policy kind of thing. I promised I would give prices on the types of exposures. This game takes 10 to 15 minutes to play. We spent about 3 months in production, and we spent about $100,000 on it. Another interesting game surrounds continuous process improvement. How many of you guys are familiar with continuous process? Really? Wow. Yeah, a couple of you. Okay. So, this is kind of a Lean Six Sigma. You're kind of in a factory quality assurance type stuff, and it's a process. And one of the things that we focused on with our games initiative was we didn't want to get hung up on being too serious, right? Like, we want to have our educational goals. We don't implement our games just because we want people to have fun, that's for sure. But we wanted to make sure that we were able to keep people engaged with our content. And therefore, we started leveraging the concepts of cognitive fidelity. And in our minds, cognitive fidelity exists or can be implemented when you have someone complete a process as they would in the real world. So it doesn't matter if you're employing the 7 tools of continuous process improvement in a factory that's building rubber stampers for, grenades, or if you're building missiles to prevent aliens from smiting the Earth, right? Because you're still maintaining a process. And so this has allowed us to use a lot more fantasy in our games, with the ability to still extract that to appropriate learning objectives, because we're able to keep the process intact and have people apply it as they would to the sorts of problems that they're going to be faced with in real life. We're just sort of abstracting it for the application case. So this one was built first by Retro Lab, which is a little flash games lab out of the University of Central Florida. I'm actually in Orlando, Florida, so I'm actually close by to a lot of the developers, you'll notice. This was a 1-month production cycle, 25K, but it led to a tool that allows people to actually implement the 7 continuous process improvement tools, which is a year-long initiative for 250K. So this is a little mini game that's a primer. When we launched the site, we launched with 13 games, not coincidentally, and we made a promise to launch a game every month, which we had a very hard time doing because we were immediately faced with a large breach of security given our site. So we're up to 15 games, and we have another 7 that will start to come out monthly in the near future. We have rat games, and these are particularly interesting. We have a series of 8 games that are focused on business cost and finance concepts. And these are really, really very simple memorization games. Can you match the concept or apply it with the actual application of that content? These were built for us by Next Gen New Media, which I believe they're located in Arlington, Virginia. And so these are 8 of the games that we also have on the site that we expect everyone to be able to play because they should have this vocabulary. Another game we had built was by the Advanced Distributed Learning Group, which is a support organization for the Department of Defense. This is a game named Charge, and we've actually transitioned this one into an iPhone game as well. This is a game that's based on the tenets of contracting. And when you're a government contracting agent, you have to put out a requirement and take a look at the bids that you get and determine what's the best value for the government. The lowest price that meets the need is sort of our rule of thumb. And so we set this particular game in the Q-bond sort of relationship, so that you have an agent who comes to you with requirements for different weapons, and you review different sorts of contracts, and you select a weapon, and they go off to fight a villain, and either they come back all beat up or they come back all happy. And this is one, I think, this is one of my favorites, this one, Procurement Fraud. And this was another one of the finalists from the Serious Games Challenge that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. Time Traveler. This is a non-flash game. It's one of the few that we have. And this was a game that was built by both Tandem Learning and a company called Hybrid Learning, and they're in Pennsylvania. It allows people to analyze historical project data. You're trying to build a time travel machine, and you have to determine if the information that you've received is appropriate and flag any problems with that data. And if you don't, at the end, you can't travel into time, so you can't talk to the future, which is a bit of a bummer, it turns out. And then we have Select to Sell. I urge you guys to go and play some of these games. They're kind of cute. Gives it a sense. Oh, I forgot about pricing. Continuous Process Improvement was 25K. Time Traveler was 100K. This one, Select to Sell, a logistics lifecycle overview game, was 25K in 1 month in production again. And it really is just a walkthrough of the entire military logistics lifecycle for those of you who can't wait to get into that. So, as I mentioned, we released with 13 games. We have 15, and we have a 16th, which will be the first one to utilize the leaderboard functionality coming out soon. The games that we've primarily poised to have leaderboard functionality are sort of those fun, free rice type of vocabulary test games, because we wanted people within the functional areas to be able to compete with the faculty and with each other and with our directors, and that way we would see who's really doing well. We got great press on our release. We were in Wired and the DoD Live, which I'm sure you guys aren't that familiar with, National Defense Magazine. Within our first week of launching, we had 100,000 hits, which is a big deal. The AT&L workforce is 145,000, so it wasn't the whole workforce, and I doubt that actually a lot of that was our workforce, but we did pretty well on our launch. We haven't actually specifically marketed our site to the acquisition community. We've only really made a public release. And so we haven't really started incentivizing our own users to start using the site, which is interesting. And so I think that brings us to the bottom line, which is we are looking always for people to build us games. And we intend to continue to release a game, hopefully every month, for at least the next 3 years. So we're certainly looking for people to partner with us and to help us continue down this path. We know that serious games is a topic that sometimes scares smaller development firms that don't have a lot of experience, but we're here to help you with that. And then I wanted to show you the Serious Games Challenge, which is the Serious Games Showcase and Challenge, which is hosted every year at the IITSEC conference, the Inter-Service Industry Training, Simulation, and Education Conference in Orlando, Florida. I've put the website up here. We accept serious games, but they don't have to be military focused. And we have a lot of great prizes, and the conference brings in 20,000 people every year. And I think last year we had 50 submissions. We're hoping to get to 100 this year. So if you guys know of any serious games, if you guys know of any games that have social impacts or have impacts other than entertainment, we urge you to send them to us or contact us and be part of that as well. And with that, I believe we will take any questions if you guys have any, and if you're willing to approach a microphone to ask them. I know it's a demo. Or he's a runner. You guys are all dying to build games for us, right? Yeah? Oh, he's got a question.
Oh my God.
You want me to give him?
There you go. So my question is, let's start with
And
is,
will be.
And will be.
Yes.
The fraud procurement investigation game, is that to train people who are going to be investigating actual fraud procurement, or is the goal to educate people who might be tempted to engage in this kind of fraud?
That's a good question, because I think that some of these things go both ways. For those of you who work for sort of the corporate world, there's always that mandatory training stuff that you have to do every year: information assurance, sexual harassment, and procurement fraud is one of the things that we have to do as an acquisition workforce. We didn't design the game to really provide a high-level training experience for people who might be the investigators of procurement fraud. And we really wanted everyone to understand, because the concept is so shaded and gray, when it's okay to accept something from someone and a gift. And so our real focus was to apply the concepts to situations so that people would be able to understand both when someone else was committing fraud, when they might be committing fraud, what the real lines were around that. And I think it brings up an interesting component, though, because sometimes we think it's fun. I have a friend who built an ER game where they focused on trying to kill someone, as in the opposite of trying to save someone, because if you know how to kill someone, then at least you know what not to do, right? And so I think that there's a lot of possibility of doing some really interesting things with concepts like that. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you so much. Thanks for coming so late.
Great. Thank you, Alicia.